May 1945. Annapolis, Maryland. In a dimly lit warehouse at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory, Dr. Robert Goddard stood motionless before the object that symbolized both vindication and defeat. The frail physicist, his throat ravaged by cancer and his voice reduced to a hoarse whisper, ran his hand across the cold aluminum skin of a captured German V-2 rocket. For 2 decades he had been America's lone prophet of rocketry, building liquid-fueled rockets in the desert on shoestring budgets while the government dismissed his vision as fantasy. Now, surrounded by Navy engineers and Army ordnance officers, Goddard confronted the undeniable truth. The Germans hadn't merely built a rocket. They had built an entire industrial revolution in rocketry, one that had unfolded while America slept. The weapon towering before him stood 46 feet tall and gleamed like a monument to lost time. What Goddard couldn't yet know was that the examination taking place in that warehouse would reveal a technological gap so wide that it would take American scientists more than a decade to close. The V-2 wasn't simply ahead of America's capabilities. It embodied technologies that didn't even exist in the United States, solutions to problems American engineers hadn't yet identified, and a level of manufacturing precision beyond anything achieved in American industry. The rocket before him was proof that while America had Robert Goddard, Germany had Kármán, a sprawling research complex with thousands of scientists, unlimited state funding, and 7 years of head start in weaponized rocketry. And the story of how America discovered just how far behind it had fallen began not in that warehouse, but a month earlier, deep inside a mountain in central Germany. April 11, 1945. The Harz Mountains. Units of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division advanced cautiously through the tunnels of the Mittelwerk underground complex near Nordhausen, expecting another conventional weapons facility. What they found instead defied belief. The tunnels stretched for miles beneath the mountain, filled with production lines assembling massive rockets at various stages of completion. Components lay in orderly stacks, engines mounted on stands, crates of gyroscopes, wiring harnesses, and fuel systems ready for final installation. Technical documents were piled high in offices and storerooms. Then the soldiers found the human cost. Emaciated prisoners, survivors from the Mittelbau concentration camp, lay on the floor or slumped against machinery. Thousands more had already died building these weapons in slave labor conditions. The Germans had hidden their rocket program in the earth itself, powered by suffering. Major James Hamel of U.S. Army Ordnance walked through those tunnels in disbelief. The Germans, it turned out, had been producing V-2 missiles at a rate of 600 per month. Each rocket required more than 50,000 precision parts. The machining, the quality control, the logistics of moving materials through that underground labyrinth, all of it represented an industrial achievement that seemed impossible for a nation supposedly collapsing under Allied bombardment. But Hamel understood something the infantrymen didn't. These weren't just weapons. They were the future, and the Soviets were coming. The Red Army's occupation zone would begin in weeks. Everything in the facility, every document, every component, every rocket, would fall into Stalin's hands unless the Americans acted fast. Orders went out immediately. Colonel Holger Toftoy, Chief of Technical Intelligence in Washington, received an urgent cable. Secure the rockets. Secure the documents. Move them out before the Soviets arrive. What followed was codenamed Special Mission V-2, one of the most important intelligence operations of the war's final days. American troops worked around the clock, loading railway cars with everything they could move. By the time the last train departed, 341 rail cars were filled with V-2 components, enough hardware to assemble roughly 100 complete rockets. Tons of technical documents accompanied them, all bound for the port of Antwerp, where Liberty ships waited to carry America's captured prize across the Atlantic. By late May, the first shipments arrived at the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. There, in the sun-baked isolation of the Tularosa Basin, American engineers began unpacking crates and cataloging the contents. With each component they examined, with each technical drawing they unfolded, the magnitude of German achievement became clearer and more unsettling. The V-2, designated Aggregate 4 by its German creators, was a 46-foot missile weighing nearly 28,000 pounds at launch. It could deliver a 1-ton warhead over 200 miles with remarkable accuracy. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real revelation came when American engineers began to take it apart. At the base of the rocket sat its heart, a massive liquid-fueled engine capable of producing 60,000 pounds of thrust. To engineers familiar with Goddard's work, this number was staggering. Goddard's largest experimental engine had achieved just under 1,000 pounds of thrust after years of effort. The Germans had created an engine 60 times more powerful and were mass-producing it. Dr. Theodore von Kármán, director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at Caltech, was among the first to examine the captured rockets. His team had been working since 1942 on the Army's Corporal missile project, but when he saw the V-2's propulsion system, he was blunt. "We are at least 7 years behind." The engine itself represented multiple technological breakthroughs. The combustion chamber used a double-wall design through which the alcohol fuel circulated before being injected into the chamber, cooling the walls while preheating the fuel. This regenerative cooling solved one of rocketry's greatest challenges, preventing the chamber from melting under combustion temperatures that reached more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Then there was the turbopump, perhaps the most astonishing feature of all. Each V-2 contained a steam-driven turbine spinning at 4,000 revolutions per minute, driving centrifugal pumps that forced fuel and liquid oxygen into the engine at 125 liters per second. The turbine generated 600 horsepower and had to operate at temperatures and pressures that would destroy any conventional pump. American engineers stared at it in disbelief. The turbine blades were forged from nickel-chromium alloys that could endure both the heat and the rotational forces. The pump seals prevented liquid oxygen, at nearly minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit, from leaking at high speed. Lieutenant Commander Robert Truax, a Navy engineer, summarized the situation in his report. "The German turbopump is not merely ahead of American technology. It is technology we do not possess. To duplicate it would require new alloys, new casting methods, new manufacturing processes. We estimate 18 months minimum to create a single prototype, assuming unlimited funding." On October 24, 1946, a V-2 carried a 35mm motion picture camera to 65 miles altitude. The images it returned, grainy, black and white, showing the curvature of the Earth, were the first photographs ever taken from space. They proved that the boundary of space could be crossed and that the technology to do so already existed. By 1948, the Army Ordnance Department established a permanent rocket center at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. There, von Braun's team and their American counterparts began developing new missiles based on V-2 principles but adapted for U.S. production. The first of these was the Redstone missile, tested in 1953. It retained the V-2's architecture, liquid oxygen and alcohol propellants, turbopump delivery, gyroscopic guidance, but incorporated improvements in efficiency and reliability. The gap that had seemed unbridgeable in 1945 was finally narrowing. By the mid-1950s, American engineers had moved beyond imitation. The Jupiter, Thor, and Atlas missiles represented original American designs. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, America answered with Explorer 1 just 3 months later, on a Jupiter C rocket derived from Redstone technology. The Saturn V, designed by von Braun's team for NASA in the 1960s, carried that lineage to its ultimate expression. Each of its F-1 engines produced 1.5 million pounds of thrust, 25 times that of the V-2. The design principles were the same: regenerative cooling, turbo-pump fuel delivery, gimbaled engines, and precision guidance, all first proven inside the German missile. Looking back, the V-2's legacy is both inspiring and deeply troubling. It was a weapon of terror that killed thousands, yet it became the foundation of the modern space age. The slave labor that built it remains one of the darkest stains of the war, but its technological achievement reshaped human destiny. For the American scientists who examined those first captured rockets in 1945, the experience was humbling. The United States, industrial giant, victor of the war, had been years behind a nation it had just defeated. Robert Goddard's brilliance had gone largely unrecognized. While Germany had invested national resources in turning theory into reality, the lesson was unmistakable. Technological superiority demands sustained investment, institutional support, and vision. Genius alone is not enough. When NASA dedicated the Goddard Space Flight Center in 1959, Administrator T. Keith Glennon reflected on that truth. Robert Goddard dreamed of rockets that could reach the moon. He built rockets that reached 9,000 feet. The Germans, working independently, built rockets that reached space. From that painful recognition came the determination to catch up and to surpass. The warehouse in Annapolis where Goddard first touched the V-2 is long gone. But the revelation that took place there changed American history. The rocket he examined was Germany's vengeance weapon. For America, it became something else entirely, a wake-up call, a teacher, and a challenge. The United States did catch up. It learned, invested, and ultimately sent humans beyond Earth's orbit. But that journey began in those warehouses and tunnels, in the recognition of how far behind the nation had fallen, and in the decision that it would never happen again. When Wernher von Braun stood at Cape Canaveral in July 1969, watching Apollo 11 rise toward the moon atop a Saturn V, he said quietly, "We always knew it was possible." The physics were clear even in the 1930s. What changed was not the science, but the commitment. America in 1969 achieved what Germany in 1945 could not. Focusing the full will of a nation not on vengeance, but on exploration. And it all began with a captured rocket in a quiet warehouse, and a dying physicist who understood exactly what it meant, and the surprises continued. The V-2's guidance system was unlike anything the Americans had ever seen. Developed by engineer Helmut Holzer, it used an analog computer, the Mischgerät, that integrated data from gyroscopes and accelerometers to maintain course and altitude. 2 gyroscopes controlled pitch, yaw, and roll. A pendulous integrating accelerometer, the first of its kind, calculated velocity by integrating acceleration over time. When the rocket reached its programmed velocity, typically around 3,500 miles per hour, the guidance computer shut down the engine automatically. The sophistication of the system stunned American scientists. The gyroscopes, built by Chrysler GmbH, were machined to tolerances that U.S. firms could not yet achieve. The control system used 8 moving surfaces, 4 aerodynamic rudders, and 4 graphite vanes positioned directly in the rocket's exhaust jet, operating at over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Charles Stark Draper of MIT, one of America's foremost experts in guidance systems, examined the hardware with professional awe. His own lab had been experimenting with gyroscopic instruments for aircraft and submarines. But the V-2 system was in another league. They solved the integration problem, he wrote. This is the first fully electronic active control system ever deployed on any vehicle, a fly-by-wire system decades ahead of anything in aviation. If the technology itself was astonishing, the manufacturing quality was perhaps even more so. American inspectors found welds that looked hand-polished, tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, redundant circuits, and overbuilt structural supports. One ordnance officer noted, "Every component appears designed to survive worst-case conditions. The Germans built for reliability under combat. We build for efficiency." The electrical system revealed the same philosophy. The V-2 used a 24-volt architecture powered by both the main turbopump and an auxiliary turbine. The wiring harness contained 8 miles of carefully bundled, protected cable, motor-driven valves, ignition circuits, telemetry transmitters, all integrated with precision unheard of in American practice. When Goddard examined the captured rocket that May afternoon, he recognized many of its features: liquid oxygen and alcohol propellants, gyroscopic stabilization, turbine-driven fuel pumps, and jet vanes for steering. In a private letter to his patron, Harry Guggenheim, he wrote with quiet bitterness, "The Germans have used my patents. They have taken concepts I developed and built them at a scale I could never achieve. The V-2 is what my rockets could have become if anyone in America had listened." But Goddard misunderstood one crucial thing. The Germans hadn't stolen his designs. They had developed their own. Hermann Oberth's theoretical work had paralleled Goddard's in the 1920s. Wernher von Braun and his Peenemünde team began liquid fuel experiments as early as 1932. By 1934, their A-2 rocket had already surpassed the altitudes Goddard reached in New Mexico. Where Goddard had worked with a handful of assistants and modest private funding, the Germans had enjoyed state sponsorship, access to universities, and an army of engineers. His highest flight had reached 9,000 feet. The V-2 reached 50 miles, crossing into space. His best engine produced 985 pounds of thrust. The German engine produced 60,000. Peenemünde consumed resources on a scale comparable to the Manhattan Project. By June 1945, as American engineers continued studying the captured V-2s, the verdict was clear. The United States faced a critical strategic vulnerability. Rocket technology would define the next era of warfare. The Soviets had already seized Peenemünde and much of the remaining German expertise. If America failed to act, it would enter the post-war world a full generation behind. That realization led directly to one of the most controversial operations of the post-war years, Operation Paperclip. In September 1945, Wernher von Braun and 126 members of his team arrived under military custody at Fort Bliss, Texas. They were the same men who had built Hitler's vengeance weapons. Some had SS ranks. Most had overseen factories where slave laborers died by the thousands. Their rockets had terrorized London and Antwerp, but they possessed knowledge America needed desperately. The moral dilemma was profound. The rockets had been built with human suffering, yet the Cold War had already begun. The Soviets were recruiting German scientists of their own under engineer Helmut Gottrup, rebuilding their program behind the Iron Curtain. America could not afford moral hesitation. At White Sands Proving Ground, assembly of the captured rockets began in 1946. The first static engine test took place on March 15. The first full launch followed a month later, on April 16. At 2:47 p.m., the reassembled V-2 lifted from the desert floor, then spiraled out of control. A fin tore loose, and the rocket crashed after climbing just 3 miles. Colonel Harold Turner, who witnessed the launch, summed it up. "We have the hardware. We have the men who designed it, but we don't yet have the infrastructure that built it, or the experience of 6,000 launches. The Germans had that. We're starting from zero." Over the next few years, 67 captured V-2s were launched from White Sands. About two-thirds were considered successful. Each flight taught new lessons in propulsion, guidance, and high-altitude dynamics. American universities and laboratories joined in, MIT, Caltech, General Electric, sending instruments aloft to measure cosmic radiation, capture upper atmosphere data, and even photograph Earth from space.